Welcome to another episode of A Bro's Guide to Glitter. Today is a very special episode and the beginning of us shaking up our format. The podcast still has the same premise of talking to male-identifying guests about stereotypically girly things, but consider this the first of many special edition episodes. We'll be talking about a custom men are known to participate in, a sociological phenomenon known as male flight. We'll be defining male flight, talking about its social implications, and how it's affected cheerleading, nursing, whiskey, and higher education. And now, it's time for me to welcome my very special guest. They're our first non-binary guest and uses they-them pronouns. We met all the way back in 2014 when we were both in the ensemble of Anything Goes. We ended up going to high school together, and the funny thing is, at the time, we both had brown hair of nearly the same length, so a lot of people confused the two of us for each other. And truthfully, our faces look nothing alike, and now our looks and styles are completely different. But nevertheless, I was honored to be confused with them, and that inside joke between us became a very important friendship. And through all the school, band, theater, travel, and whatnot we've done together, they've always been such an amazing friend. Please welcome Georgia Pertsch.
Hello, everybody. Oh, Sarah, that was such a cute intro. Thank you.
Thank you. So, since this whole episode is about the need for a lot of people to perfectly perform their gender, I wanted to start by asking you, have you ever been picked on for liking something too feminine or ever been picked on for liking something too masculine?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that comes to mind is like in early high school, I was into playing video games. And, I was on Steam, Xbox, all of that sort of thing.
Wow,
And
I didn't even know this.
really, oh,
I didn't.
interesting.
Okay, keep going.
Well, anyway, so that was kind of prompted because I have three older brothers. And so I inherited a lot of the things that they liked to do, including video games. And I didn't get picked on for it necessarily, but I felt like everyone was constantly surprised that I was into playing video games because they're so like stereotypically masculine.
Mm-hmm.
With like the first person shooter games, which have been in the news for years about like school shootings and that sort of thing, and they've definitely been made very masculine, or stereotypically masculine at least.
Yeah.
And but I guess another thing would be like when I was younger, I definitely liked to go shopping with my mom, which is definitely stereotypically girly. Like going to all of like the department stores and having like a shopping day where you try everything on and you show each other and that sort of thing. Not into that at all now, but when I was into it, my brothers would make fun of me for it. Yeah.
It's funny because I actually have gotten more into shopping recently just because I've, started to understand my style and started to become more comfortable in my body. But I hated shopping when I was younger. And I think the worst part about shopping was just walking around for 4 hours and not really sitting.
Mhm.
But that was something that actually not liking shopping, that was something that a lot of aunts and other older female figures in my life were like, what? You don't like shopping?
Right.
You don't like buying clothes? And I was just like, nah, dude.
Mhm.
So
Exactly.
that's. Mhm.
Yeah.
And I can't think of being picked on for liking something too masculine. But I do think I have a specific memory freshman year of rehearsal for Nice Work If You Can Get It. And Mrs. Tribuzzi being like, can we get two strong boys to come lift this ladder?
Right.
That was not her voice. She did not speak in a Southern accent. But, I just add Southern accents whenever I'm speaking in flashback.
Mhm.
But,
Obviously.
yeah. But I ran over to pick it up to make a point of, I'm a strong girl and I
Mm.
can do that. And she was just like, okay, cool, thanks. But a lot of people were either like, oh, she said girl, you're not listening to her instructions, or were kind of like applauding me for trying to pretend to be a big strong boy
Mhm.
even though I was a 5'3" girl.
Mhm.
Like, it wasn't like I was standing up for myself. It was like, how cute.
Right.
Little
Yeah.
girl trying to be big boy. So,
Yeah, because
yeah,
obviously you wouldn't aspire to be anything else
exactly.
at that point in time.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, let's start by defining what male flight actually is. So, male flight is the sociological phenomenon of men abandoning and discrediting an activity as soon as a majority of those participants become women. This has definitely happened to cheerleading and nursing, but there's emerging speculation that this phenomenon will begin to occur with whiskey drinking and enrollment in higher education. The society pages in Wikipedia tie the practice to something called androcentrism, which is the conscious or unconscious practice of placing a masculine viewpoint at the center of one's worldview, thereby marginalizing femininity. So that was a whole lot of Wikipedia jargon. But what do you think? Do you have something to add that's Wikipedia doesn't?
Well, honestly, I could totally see how that happens. Um, Personally, my own experience, like in college, in public health, global health, and anthropology, definitely more like non-male dominated for
Mm-hmm.
sure. And for the men that I do see in those fields, um, I just wonder what it's like to be in a community that's surrounded by, or a community is in like classroom or study group or um, major that is not dominated by the gender that they identify with.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder how that feels for them specifically. Um, and I wonder if that makes them feel like they don't belong there. Because obviously we can also relate this to different types of identities, like racial identity, sexual identity, that sort of thing. Um, and I feel like you could ask the same question for those types of uh, certain identity dominated fields.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely see how this happens. I guess, yeah. What was the question? I've forgotten the question. I'm
Just
so
to say
sorry.
what you think.
Just going on my own tangent over here.
Well, that's what makes it a podcast. A
That's
podcast
so
is just
true.
a giant tangent.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
Well, and that's interesting about how it's a guy in a stereotypically female field because it's not the yes, the women in that field do get marginalized, but the whole field is marginalized because of its association with femininity. So then
Oh
what's
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
like
Okay.
to be a man
Hmm.
in in something that is marginalized because it's considered feminine or is linked to femininity even though you are a straight man?
Hmm.
That is a good question.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
as an anthropology major, my next question was going to be, have you taken any classes on gender and sexuality?
I have not. No. Um, yeah, I guess the things that I have discussed in my anthropology classes about gender and sexuality relate to how differences in those identities translate into like health decisions or decisions about health behavior.
Yeah.
So I don't think I can speak on the anthropology of gender and sexuality.
Yeah, and certainly when you tell me about your anthropology classes, they're always so culturally focused
Yeah,
and
yeah,
with an
definitely.
international view.
Hmm.
World traveler, Georgia.
Maybe, who knows?
What do you mean maybe? You've already been to Peru.
That's true. But I meant like as in my career.
Yeah.
I've definitely this is definitely a tangent, but
Hmm.
as I've developed my sense of understanding of anthropology, public health, global health, um I have understood um that the space that people take up in those fields is must change, and my role within those fields also needs to change. So I've definitely taken more of a focus, or I guess not a focus, but an interest in like the decolonization of those fields, um, rather than potentially being part of the problem.
Hmm.
So the problem is in going places and like controlling them. But anyway, that's such a tangent. That doesn't need to be in the pod.
Well, but it's interesting about you. And because I was realizing as we started talking about anthropology, when I was writing up your little description, I was like, there's so much to say about Georgia. We've done practically everything together. You
True,
know,
yeah.
like, let's just like keep it sweet, simple, say there's a lot. They're a great person. But then as we started talking about anthropology, I'm like, the listeners should know Georgia is a smart person. Georgia is a hipster from Seattle. Or going
Oh,
to
okay,
Seattle.
okay. Here we go.
Georgia.
Hipster. Okay, Sarah. Hipsters are like millennials who try to be the like hippies. They're the
So
ones with the
hipsters aren't
handlebar
hipsters enough for
mustaches.
you.
What?
You're telling me hipsters aren't hipster enough for you.
Oh no. I would never consider myself a hipster. I'm what you would call a Seattle queer. It's a certain type, we've become a species here.
And you see, even with the species terms, here we are talking through anthropology again.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about this. I always start on a word association game on a topic, but since there's so many topics wrapped within male flight, let's just talk about the most famous topic, which is cheerleading.
Mm.
So I'm going to put 15 seconds on the clock, and in that time, you're going to say everything that comes to your mind when you think of cheerleading. Are you ready?
I am. I'm nervous, but I'm ready.
Don't be nervous. I'm
Okay,
literally
okay.
counting on my fingers,
Okay.
so it's less official.
Okay, got it.
All right, go.
Football, male gaze, short skirts, those cone things that people yell out of, flips, somersaults in the air, flexibility. I already said football, but basketball, sporting games in general, NFL. Oh my gosh, NFL, Dallas Cowboys. That's it. I'm out of time.
That's perfect timing. I am so glad that you mentioned like the short skirts and the male gaze.
Mhm.
And the funny thing about Dallas Cowboys, that was the first team I thought of when I thought of cheerleading.
Right? There's something about them.
Well, get this. There was in I don't know what year it was, but there was one year where a porn production studio made a porn where the plot was basically like the stars were Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. Um, and
Oh.
it wasn't. I don't know the whole details of it. I should look it up. Or maybe you, listener, should look it up. Or maybe don't.
Maybe
'Cause
don't.
maybe that's
Probably.
inappropriate. But still, and the Dallas Cowboys sued. They were like, dude, those are our cheerleaders. Like, copyright infringement, first
Mm.
off. And then B, you're even more sexualizing our cheerleaders. But
Yeah, literally.
the cheerleaders that come to the top of my mind are the ones that had like a porn lawsuit associated with them.
Mm.
And maybe it was the lawsuit that did it that made the Dallas Cowboys notoriously sexy. Or maybe that image was there before. I don't know a lot of football. But yeah. What's up with the sex symbolism around cheerleading?
Seriously. Seriously. And I think I haven't heard of that story. But I think for me it was like I feel like I just specifically remember their uniforms, and don't get me wrong, I do not watch football. I do not watch football. But when I
Don't
was
get this wrong, viewers. Georgia sports, no.
however, actually volleyball is so fun to watch. I love volleyball. Do
And you're a
not like
swimmer.
football. What?
I said, and you're a swimmer.
Yeah. But UW doesn't have a swim team like at all. So
Oh yeah.
I know it's so strange.
So
Anyway, um it was like their uniforms for some reason, I doubt that this is correct, but
yeah.
I feel like they have a horseshoe on both boobs.
Let's look it up.
Let's look it up.
Dallas Cowboys uniform.
Maybe
Oh,
it's just like
Dallas
the
Cowboys
blue
cheerleaders.
cheerleaders.
See, I think of the cheerleaders before I think of. Let's see. There's multiple versions because the one I'm seeing now has kind of like a cowboy look where they have like a little vest, but then I'm also seeing kind of a red version of that, but they are essentially in bikini tops.
Right. And like why do they have to be in bikini tops?
Yeah. Yeah. And cuz even with it's kind of like that in some aspects of the dance world too. I mean, dance is obviously a very serious art form. And when I say serious, I mean it should be taken seriously as an art form and a sport. But if you watch Dance Moms, they're wearing kind of cheerleader adjacent outfits for certain numbers where they could very much wear a Martha Graham all black, super loose piece that doesn't show your body. But for some reason, there is the choice to show off more of the body, and it's a sense of performance.
Especially in children with dance
Yes.
moms.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is not how cheerleading started.
Tell me about it.
So, cheerleading, actually, let me look up what your cheerleading started. It started in the mid 1800s as an all male sport characterized by gymnastics, stunts, and crowd leadership. According to the society pages, it was considered equivalent in prestige to an American flagship of masculinity, football. So cheerleading was equal to football.
Wow.
And according to a 1911 edition of Nation, they said the reputation of having been a valiant cheerleader is one of the most valuable things a boy can take away from college. As a title to promotion in professional or public life, it ranks hardly second to that of having been a quarterback.
Wow.
And there are 3 U.S. presidents who were cheerleaders, and that's FDR, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Ronald Reagan.
Interesting.
And so the idea how we went from guys to girls is during World War II, all the guys were being conscripted into the military. And so before, women were very much excluded, very much banned from cheerleading. But without all the guys in high school and in college, schools started saying, okay, actually, we'll let in some women because we really need cheerleaders. And then the guys came back, except instead of going back to cheerleading, people were like, yeah, let's just let women keep cheering. And so the idea that we originally went from men in these sweaters and colorful sweatpants being deemed manly and valiant, and seeing cheerleading as a step to being a leader in your professional life, the fact that we went from that to women wearing bikini tops and being over sexualized and made porn after, it's a jarring difference.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Did you ever want to be a cheerleader when you were little?
Um, I did like watching cheerleaders much more than the football, just because, like dancing, I was just into watching people perform. Again, not a big sports person,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think I ever wanted to be a cheerleader because I understood from a very early age that there was some level of objectification
Yeah.
of women. And I just didn't personally feel like that was something I wanted to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. I. It's interesting that you say you talk about being aware of the objectification of women. I don't know how aware I was
Hmm.
as a child. And I don't know when I started to become aware. But I did, when I was little, I did want to be a cheerleader. Because, you watch all of these teen movies, you watch Disney Channel, you watch even the realistic Barbie movies, you watch all sorts of news and television, and you see the cheerleaders being the popular girls and being the ultimate symbol of femininity. And so I did want to be that for a while. And because
Hmm.
also I was a dancer when I was younger, so obviously that's cheerleading adjacent. And now that I think about it, I remember when I was in middle school and I thought I was going to go to NDB. Um, Obviously I didn't in the end, but when I thought I would talk to the cheerleaders and the girls on the pom squad because they have their own cheer squad and then they had a pom squad which was more dancey. And I was somehow, well, I went to NDE. I wanted to go to Notre Dame Belmont High School, but I went to Notre Dame Elementary School. And so I was exposed to the cheerleaders there. And so I saw it more as a dance opportunity. And I was interested in it. But then by the time I got to high school, that's when I started to see the multiple layers of cheerleading in the idea that there were people who really took cheer seriously. And I
Hmm.
remember our freshman and sophomore year at San Mateo High School, they would do these competitions and actually like rank nationally. I don't remember the details, but I remember it being a big deal when we were underclassmen. And I didn't do cheer because I didn't have time for it and I didn't really get to know the people who uh, were on it really as much as I knew the people in theater and band, which I ended up doing. But by junior and senior year when they stopped doing a lot of the competitions, there were people who still took it very seriously as an art form slash sport and worked hard and loved the group. But there were people who fit into the stereotypical idea of what a high school cheerleader is, which is I'm going to do this because it is a symbol of femininity and I am going to be able to hang out at all the football games and this is going to make me popular. But the funny thing is that those people were not as beloved by the rest of the school and well known as the cheerleaders who really took it seriously and liked cheer for liking cheer.
Hmm.
And that's kind of my outlook on how it's changed since then
Hmm.
for me.
Yeah. Have you seen Cheer on Netflix?
I have not. And one of the reasons I haven't is because I'm a little afraid it's gonna give me like dance competition PTSD.
Understandable.
Not that my time doing dance competition was that intense or really like it wasn't anything at all like Dance Moms. But I watched Dance Moms at the time I was doing dance competition, and so then I got insecure about, wait a minute, should my nice dance teacher be as mean to me as Abby Lee Miller? And should I be as amazing and as pretty and as fit as Maddie Ziegler, who, probably doesn't even go to school because she's always dancing? And I hear that cheer competition is kind of adjacent to that in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like the community and how hardcore it is. So I don't know. I'm afraid to watch something hardcore.
Yeah, I watched a couple episodes of it, and there I began to see cheer as much more of a sport
Mm-hmm.
than like how we're describing it right now.
Yeah. And because some of the things that like cheerleaders do are ridiculous with the
I
flips
know.
and all.
Like, how is that physically possible? Who knows?
Literally. And because there are the cheers that are during the football game that are, a lot of like standing and like toe touches and arm movements. And I think that's the first thing you think about when you think, or well, maybe it's not the first thing you think about when you think about it's
True.
one aspect to cheerleading.
Hmm.
But the complete opposite aspect is the flips and the bending of the legs and executing the impossible. And so the fact that cheerleading teams do one and then 10 minutes later do the other is always surprising to see.
Yeah. And I actually just remembered something. So, being in marching band in college,
Hmm.
um, we are definitely adjacent to the cheer team at UW.
Hmm.
And we're in the same, like we're both in the athletic department. We're next to each other in the football games. We see each other during like the pre-football game rallies. And I've often asked them, like whenever I run into one of them, when I'm in the context of band, I'm like, do you actually like being a cheerleader? It
Hmm.
seems like so much work. And for what? Like most of them at one point, actually, this is an interesting story, but at UW, I think um, one of the cheer directors or like the person choosing who was part of the team actually got fired because they specifically like um, didn't accept uh, a couple people. I can't remember the story exactly, but it was like a huge thing. But they didn't. The point is that they didn't look like how
Oh,
they didn't look like the image the person who got fired wanted them to fit.
yeah.
So a couple years ago, most of the cheerleaders were blonde, had the spray tan. Um, we're all about the same size and height. But now since that person has been fired, it's definitely like diversified away from that. Um, but like that goes to show that even at a college level, there's something to be questioned. Like why why do certain people choose to do cheer? Um, and what influence do the directors have and like the choreographers? And why do they make those decisions?
Okay, so let's talk about nursing now.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, and that's good because you come from a family of medical background. So
Yes.
that's something that we can talk about more.
Hmm.
So, with women being nurses, nurses were pretty much always men since ancient Rome. But during the American Civil War, all the guys were fighting on the front, and so they got women to come be military nurses. And ever since then, nursing has been predominantly female. Right now, or as of 2005, 92.3% of registered nurses were women.
Wow, that's really
Yeah,
high.
crazy. And even though after World War II, for example, the men came back and then took back all of the female factory jobs, Rosie the Riveter went back to the home, so to speak. Despite that happening with World War II, that didn't really happen with nursing after the Civil War. It remained predominantly female, and as women were trying to get more into the workforce during the Industrial Revolution, the two big options were teaching and nursing.
Hmm.
So, why do you think men didn't go back to nursing? Why do you think women were allowed to have that?
Well, I think a couple reasons. So first, I'm sure there's something like to be said about re and or entering a space that is predominantly made up of people who uh do not share your identity. Like that's super intimidating, first of all. I'm not sure that I mean, hold on. I need to collect myself for a second. I was just about to say that I'm not sure men feel intimidated. That's not true at all. I'm not sure that men would feel intimidated by women, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe what I'm trying to say. So there's that. Second of all, I think because so many women joined the nursing force, that it became a very feminized field.
Mm-hmm.
And so because men stereotypically do not ever want to be seen as anything feminine, like not even an ounce of femininity within themselves. I think that that is the main reason why men do not, or historically, men have not pursued nursing.
Well, and there's also the idea that, okay, we need more women in the medical side of the military, or we just need more people in the medical side of the military. We'll let women be nurses, but they're not going to be doctors and they're certainly not going to be surgeons.
Right.
So there's this idea that women are let into the medical sphere, but it's basically as the assistant to the doctor. And I don't say this to mean that nurses are glorified assistants. They're totally not. They have their own job and they work hard, uh, independent of doctors. But almost making nurses women paints that idea of the nurse being inferior to the male doctors and surgeons.
That is 100% understandable. And this actually brings me back. This made me remember something that my mom told me.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom is like on the board of something within the hospital. I can't remember exactly, but I know that there are representatives from each department within the hospital. So,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, like internal medicine, pediatrics, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but most of the surgery departments are like run by men. So
Interesting.
that makes me that is completely connected to this in the way that surgeons often think like they are the shit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because historically it's been a male dominated field, obviously, like we just talked about. And also, like, it's the amount of schooling and the precision that's needed. It's like, I can totally see how many surgeons get a superiority complex.
Yeah.
So it totally makes sense that having having women take over the roles of nurses from men and allowing men to rule the doctor class,
Mm-hmm.
it totally makes sense. It's all about superiority and inferiority.
It's interesting that you say that story your mom shared because that was actually an issue thinking back on it, an issue with the early seasons of Grey's Anatomy was
Mm.
that you had Meredith Grey and Sandra Oh and Katherine Heigl. I'm mixing up the actor names. But you basically had a majority female cast because it was a show created by Shonda Rhimes, and she hoped to have a lot of women and a lot of women of color in, you know, these doctor positions and in lead roles within the show. So you have a lot of female doctors on the show, but all of those female doctor main characters at the beginning of the show are either interns or one or two residents.
Yeah.
But the two big attending surgeons in the first season and the chief surgeon, all three of them are male.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they do reveal, like, oh yeah, this female attending has been here all along. But it's like, oh, well, we didn't really see that.
Right.
And oh, now here's this new female attending come in. So they eventually balance it out, but the instant knee-jerk reaction puts men in the attending position and women in the intern position.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
So, you know, as we said, nurses are very hardworking. You know more nurses than I have, but we know a few of the same nurses. And, you know, what do you think are the causes and effects of the sexy nurse Halloween costumes?
Oh, the sexy nurse Halloween costume. Classic.
Yes.
I definitely think we have to tie this back to the male gaze
Mm-hmm.
once again.
Mm-hmm.
Tying it back to the cheerleading costume or the costumes. Sorry,
Yeah.
cheerleaders. I meant uniforms. And I think it also has to do with the superiority thing that we were just talking about with doctors and nurses too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nurses are only there to be at the hands and the will of doctors, supposedly. This is obviously not true because nurses do most of the work anyway. So gotta throw that out there. So, sexy nurse Halloween costumes. You know, I actually haven't seen many in real life. I gotta be honest.
I feel like I have seen most of them on TV.
Right. It's like totally a television thing.
Yeah.
What do I think about them? I think they're trash. I think they shouldn't exist. I don't know what else to say.
Because, I mean, when I think of sexy nurse Halloween costumes, if I think about actual nurses, I mean, there's plenty of young women who are attractive who, you know, could be seen wearing something like that. But if I think about, you know, my elementary school friend's mom who's a nurse, and just like 50, 60-year-old women who have two children in high school wearing those sexy nurse costumes, it's like, what? Like, it just doesn't make sense. When you think about actual nurses and people you know in nurse costumes, there isn't really reason for that. Like,
there's no reason for that.
The only reason for that is the fact that those costumes exist. Like, it feels like someone out of nowhere made a sexy nurse costume, and so then that sexified nurses.
Right. Even though it's nothing like reality. Like,
Yeah.
nurses don't wear those hats. You know what I'm talking
I think
about?
they used to. Yeah, I think they did. Because have you seen Ratched on Netflix?
I haven't.
Oh.
But actually, that you bring up a really good point. They used to.
Yeah.
These costumes are reminiscent of the times when women were oh shit, I'm forgetting the word. Hold on, give me a moment. I can't remember the word. Hold on. I was gonna make such a good point, Sarah. Oh my gosh.
I know what you're saying. They were domesticated.
Right. Okay, let me start over. So you made a really good point saying that they used to wear that because these costumes represent when women were at the will of men and were had when society had not um taken bigger steps to resist patriarchy. And wow, my mind is being blown right now because these costumes are to remind men that at one point they were always superior to women.
Interesting. That's a very interesting conclusion.
And it reminds men of when women were objectified constantly. Not that they aren't now, but what I'm saying is like
The 1950s pencil skirt, little hat type bun thing.
exactly. And everything that a woman did was to appease to men and their desires and to their gaze.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow.
We really just debunked that. Or
We
you
really did.
That.
We really did. But you know what? I do have to say something.
Yes.
I want to make it clear that this discussion is mainly actually completely talking about straight men. I know several and what's also interesting actually is I wonder how many of those like 7% that are not female registered nurses. I wonder how many of them are gay men.
That's a good question. And because the thing that I was going to get to when we talk about social implications, certainly it is straight men who are doing the sexualization of the nurses and cheerleaders, well, straight and bi men, or like any men who have the capacity, who like women in some capacity, uh, do the sexualization, but that also doesn't drive gay men from being afraid to go into cheerleading or go into nursing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sure there's still plenty of gay men and bi men, etc., who feel like they can't be a nurse because it's too feminine. And even though they like men, so they're already breaking the heteronormative boundaries, they still need to perform masculinity.
Yeah, good point.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about two things that are more debated
Okay.
about whether or not it's affected by male flight. And this is whiskey and higher education. So let's talk about whiskey first. This was the one I found weird. And I found it a week ago when doing research for this episode. So in since the 90s, the percentage of female whiskey drinkers have doubled from 15% of female, I say females, and it's weird to say females in that way, from 15% of women and female identifying people drinking whiskey to now 30. And since then, 6% less of men are drinking whiskey. And there's more female
60%?
No, 6.
Oh, okay.
You were like, ah. But there's more female executives and female distillers. And so there's all these articles, specifically one with the New York Times, which is interesting, and one with The Guardian, I think, that talk about the amount of women going into the whiskey business and the amount of women drinking whiskey. And the society pages posted something that was like, oh my god, now that so many women are drinking whiskey, are men not going to drink whiskey? And they talked about male flight in that. And my reaction to all of this was like, what? Like, I don't follow the alcohol news. I don't know much about high-end liqueur, of course. But are men really fleeing? Could men really flee from drinking whiskey because more women are drinking it? Or are we just seeing the real ratio of people interested in whiskey? You know?
You know, Sarah, actually, you brought up another good point. Is this why are we centering men in this discussion? Like
Mm,
why can't it just be accepted that women can drink whiskey? Some women like to drink whiskey. Some
mm-hmm.
women can run distilleries. This is the angiocentrism. Is that what
Androcentrism.
this is the androcentrism that we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why do we care that, like, why do we care that there's a hold on, I got distracted. Let me start over. Let me start that one over. Okay. This is the androcentrism that you were talking about at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think, like what you said, this is just a balancing out of the ratios. Women now are able to do whatever they want to do without feeling, well, not necessarily all the time, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but they can do whatever they want to do without feeling like they can't because it's a male dominated thing.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point too. You know, is this just reality? Like when women are permitted to do things.
Yeah. And because even the articles themselves, they were in good intention. They were with good intention, but I have issue with the wording on two fronts. First off, there's this idea that, like, oh, look at that, so cute, yay, it's women performing masculinity, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier with the ladder story, and some people were like, yay, she's performing masculinity. Why is the performance of masculinity being praised in women? That's
Yeah.
androcentrism. Whereas when most of the time, I mean, I think now we're getting a lot better about it, and especially with like Harry Styles' Vogue cover, that's an example of a cis man performing femininity just by wearing a dress, which is really baseline, but people liking it. But most of the time, that's not the reaction to cis men performing femininity. Uh, so that felt a little weird. And then also, it felt like the articles, and this is just to me, you know, all the viewers or the listeners can read it themselves and form their own opinions. But it felt like they were definitely girl bossifying the whiskey executives in a way to prop them up and say how great they are, which is
Mm,
good, but it felt like it was happening in a way that was gender typing whiskey even worse. It
yes.
was saying how peculiar a woman should be a whiskey distiller, and because maybe you have the first female distiller, and so you write an article about her, which the first female distiller was years ago. Now there's a lot, so the article is about the amount of female distillers, but it's not. Here are the top female distillers, an expose, highlighting women in the alcohol business. It was like gasp, step aside, men, this female whiskey executive is going to take it all.
I definitely felt strange about it. And honestly, like, to be completely honest, I didn't really give a fuck if men were
Yeah.
fleeing things. Like, I really don't care,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
So that's how I felt about it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get why we need to be writing articles about this.
Yeah.
That's it. That's simply it.
I think I mean, that's a good summation. So let's talk about higher education now.
Okay.
So, a couple months ago, I sent you and Sophia a link that was talking about the majority of women in higher education. And I think that was news to me at the time. I might have heard it before, but seeing that article is what made it really stick. But what was interesting is it was framed in terms of dating. It was saying because there is a majority of women in higher education, this is a bad thing in terms of mating because now there's going to be more highly educated women than men and women earning more than men, and so these men earning less simply won't meet these women's standards. And at the time I was like, oh man, yeah, I want to marry a guy who is as smart as I am and definitely has a college degree and definitely has a job. Obviously, the job part is important, but thinking about it now, it made a problem out of the majority of women in education. And
Oh.
I didn't even realize that till right before we went onto this call.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
What did you
Yes,
think when you
Sarah.
said
Oh
it?
my gosh. Yeah. Oh my gosh. You're totally right.
What did you think as, a bisexual non-binary person? What did you think about this article, which also was framed in very cis straight terms?
Yes. Well, that is my life, so I don't really pay attention to that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, I was like, yeah, makes sense. I didn't see uh I mean, I was trying to remember the article that we were just talking about, like that I saw a couple months ago. But I was just trying to think of it like in my own context and at UW, and it like makes total sense, like you whoever you have more similarity to, and for right now, like both of us are college students, so
Yeah,
that probably means like we have more things in common with other college students.
yeah,
Um, and so like it makes sense. And yeah, you bring up a good point, like especially in our society, which values higher education and even higher education and getting jobs.
mm-hmm.
I think there's definitely something to be said about selecting people that you're similar to in
Mm-hmm.
order to date. But I also have to say, not that I agree with the article in the way that you said it paints like college educated or college women to be the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important to just discuss like the barrier to higher education that so many people have, especially in the US and around the world.
Yes,
So like we just have to like briefly talk about that.
yes,
Um, I think this is already a problem, and as I just mentioned, our society continues to hold more value to higher and higher education levels.
mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, yeah, the article does make sense. I think it called it like associative dating, maybe. I can't remember. Like you just date people who you would associate yourself with.
That part makes sense.
Yeah.
And
But I
mm-hmm.
don't think that because more women are going to college, that more men are not going to college.
Yeah,
Like that just seems kind of like, do you have any evidence to prove that?
yeah. And because that was the other thing I was going to bring up is because that is where I heard the term male flight before then, but in that article, they used the term male flight. And they said,
Right.
what's happening to men in higher education, are they not going because there's more women? But, like, that is because our society values a, college degree so much. that seems silly. I mean, there are certain schools that are more female and more male. Like a lot of the small liberal arts schools, a lot of those are predominantly female. A lot of the STEM majors, unfortunately, are predominantly male. And so there's already like gender separation within college itself. But also, did you see the Atlantic article that I put in the research page?
Hmm.
So that one, so Atlantic posted an article about the gender gap in higher education, but it didn't talk about it from like the stance of dating. The old article from a couple months ago referred to it as a mating crisis, which that was the part
That is
that,
hysterical.
yeah, is funny and made me send it to Georgia and Sophia. But this one from Atlantic wasn't blaming male flight and wasn't talking about the need for women to marry men of a certain pay or of a certain position. And because also the idea that the husband has to be higher paid or have a higher position or be as paid as the woman, that's a little backwards. I mean,
Mhm.
I can't. I mean, obviously, as I said, I would like a husband who contributes financially and who is a hard worker, whom I'm proud of. Um, but I don't need to be digging for gold. But so this Atlantic article basically was just kind of blaming men for it. It was saying like, yeah, why don't men go to college more? And the things that they talked about how historically women have gotten better grades, studied more, and behaved better in school. And I think that's the idea that because there's always been such a barrier for women in terms of education and opportunities, women are expected to work harder and are expected to be polite in classroom settings and follow the rules in order to just succeed. Whereas this men still dominate leadership positions and politics. And this article suggested that since the 1950s, men, and 1950s, I mean, that's 70 years ago, but so
Oh my gosh.
there was a time in America where men could do the bare minimum, just not do so well in high school, but get their diploma, graduate, and then get a good middle class job as like a postman, and then he's set for life.
Hmm.
And so that's basically what this article suggested. And so this article suggested that women have had to try harder to succeed the same amount as men, which is true, but then it went on to suggest that men have been getting away with doing the bare minimum, and so men are continuously trying to do the bare minimum and still succeed, which there is a certain amount of male privilege, but there's there's men doing the bare minimum and succeeding through male privilege while at college.
Hmm.
But male privilege doesn't automatically get you into college. Like there's a lot of men who are not going to college because the truth is they can't afford it.
Hmm.
And so this is where they're getting their jobs that aren't being a lawyer, aren't being I don't know, an office worker that is paid more because of your college diploma. You get what would have been a middle class job back then, and there's still like very well paid jobs if you don't go to college, but it's creating a wealth gap. But I don't necessarily think that's because all men are used to doing the bare minimum. Like I think there's a lot of class and socioeconomics at play.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think articles, especially by honestly by like any news outlet, do not really dive into the complexity of issues, which
Mm,
oversimplifies them and allows someone to be blamed, instead of a whole host of reasons, instead of broader society, instead of capitalism, for instance.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I definitely see what you're saying, and I agree with you how, um, especially with the fact that college just continues to get more expensive.
Yes.
Jobs that pay hourly, for instance, are paid less compared to inflation, compared to the price of living
Mm-hmm.
in most major cities now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, I definitely think that men shouldn't be blamed for not going to college, like, uh, in this context, you know?
Yeah.
And I definitely do not think this is a case of male flight where there are more women in college. So, oh, I'm a man, I'm not going to go to college because there are girls there, you know?
Yeah.
Like that is definitely not the case.
Yeah. And because also the value of, just thinking about this now, the value of a college education is very different depending on where you go and what you study. Like, for example, I am a drama major. I am not trying to be an actor professionally, but if I was, I would not be making six figures straight out of college.
Mhm.
However, there are people at NYU, at my school, who are paying the exact same amount of tuition as I am and are studying engineering. And they will
Mhm.
probably walk out of college with a job that'll pay them near six figures as a starting salary. And we could have the same background. We could have come from the same place. I was a hard student or a hardworking student. He was a hardworking student. Being a drama major at NYU is hard, is a lot of hours. It is a very known theater school. So we're both paying the same amount of money. We're both hardworking students. We're both spending a lot of time working. But he's going to get paid more than I was if I were to be going like the quote unquote traditional acting track. So that's also a change in, the value of education and why you should consider education to be an important thing or maybe not.
Yeah, and something I've really been thinking very hard about recently is the fact, that so many fields in our society are definitely not given the same value. Like you were just saying, in engineering major versus drama major. Um, we all, okay, well, let's see. I've, again, been thinking really hard about this.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Also, sorry, just to interrupt, I realized drama majors predominantly women, engineering majors predominantly male.
I know, I heard you use
I
he,
heard
and I was
myself
like,
use he, him too, and I was like, wait a minute.
yeah,
I've been brainwashed.
okay, but anyway, what I,
Hashtag women in STEM.
hashtag women in STEM. Um, I've been thinking about the fact that specifically with my experience in anthropology,
Mm-hmm.
everyone everyone in every major has the same level of complexity to some extent. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like at one point, for instance, let's say we're your friend group is like they're all fourth years in college, all studying different things. You've diverged so much from when you first began college together that you all have like a certain level of expertise in one area of knowledge.
Okay.
So, for instance, particularly with me in anthropology, my viewpoint, my perspective of the world, how I question things what I want to do after college has completely transformed because of the complexity of thought that is required for my classes.
Mm-hmm.
But anthropology, as the world knows, is critically acclaimed as an easy major in like just like a backup major that, you know, people who study anthropology are you know, never actually do anthropology, and they don't get paid very much once they leave college, and they just have to do something random after college, and it's an easy major, when in reality it's not. If anyone else from any other major were dropped into the anthropology classes that I take, they would have no fucking clue what's going on.
Uh-huh.
Yet it is disregarded and undervalued
Yeah.
in society, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is exactly what you were saying with the drama, with the drama versus engineering major, and like the value of college majors directly ties into the value they have in society too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about society, that's a good segue into our third topic, which is the social implications
Right.
of male flight. And we've
Mm-hmm.
already talked about sexuality in terms of, yes, it's straight males and bi males who are sexualizing women and contributing to the male gaze, but gay men are not exempt from trying to run away from femininity and having that androcentric viewpoint. But let's talk about the differences of gender. Like, we are talking about this, um, obviously, femininity, the gender performance, and the gender stereotypes is different from the biological state of being assigned female at birth. And same goes for like the masculine terms.
Right. Well, I think once you step out of the gender binary, I think you open a whole nother can of worms.
Okay.
Um, because it's not necessarily, I mean, obviously gender expression, gender identity are
Yeah.
different. Um,
Mm.
so for instance, some non-binary people I know, like who were assigned female at birth, don't have any issues with like their feminine presentation,
Mm-hmm.
but they identify as non-binary. They don't necessarily, not all non-binary people use they them pronouns. Non-binary is a gender identity, which is also different from pronouns. I
Mm-hmm.
am a non-binary person who happens to use they them pronouns, who also happens to dress more androgynously, just because that's how I feel most comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it really, like, I don't think necessarily that just because someone identifies as non-binary, they shift away from how they dress, or how people who were assigned their same sex at birth dress.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I don't know if that last part made sense, but I think you get
I
it.
understand what you mean. Yes.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
that's a very good point. And before we were talking about the difference between how trans women are treated and trans men are treated.
Yeah,
Do you want to talk about that?
sure. Um, just this is a total disclaimer. I am not a trans man or trans woman, so I do not want to speak on all of their behalves. Obviously, there are quite a few of them. So, but just from my understanding of the trans community and the difference between, you know, like the treatment of trans women and trans men, I think generally, like trans men are more accepted by society just because they, for instance, were assigned female at birth. Also, I'm not trying to exclude the intersex people. Biological sex is a spectrum too, but right now we just we I gotta stick with the binary terms just because it's what's most common in society right now.
Mm-hmm.
So just because masculinity is more accepted, I guess, in society, as in like we were talking about, like it's just more okay for um I'm stepping out of the trans box for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the trans discussion box. But when women like dress more masculinely, it's okay. It's more okay than when men dress more femininely.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a fact about society.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, like Harry Styles in the cover of Vogue with the dress, like that was surprising to some people. Whereas women who show up in suits or whatever are like, oh, that's like no big deal. They like, she looks fire, but
Uh-huh.
that's besides the point.
Yeah.
So generally, like, I think there is just more violence against trans women because the fact that they were assigned male at birth, but now lean into uh,
Femininity.
femininity, you know, and like now identify as women, which brings up the idea of turfs, which is another can of worms.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I and again do not know completely what I'm talking about. Just putting that out there.
Well, and it brings up the idea that if trans women are hate crimed at such a level for being who they are, at what, at some point it's clear that what men are against and what men are transphobic, misogynist men are being violent to is the gender expression of femininity.
Right,
It's not
right. It's the
the,
gender expression.
yeah, yeah.
And that's what I mean by when I say like leaning into femininity, I mean like the gender expression. And
Yeah.
obviously, again, like not all trans women do present femininely. That's just like the stereotype that we're going with. But oh gosh, Sarah, this is it. There's so many complexities to this. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and even the discussion, what you said about women in suits. I mean, yes, we already brought up the idea of women being applauded for performing masculinity, but my mom was talking to me about how in before she, I don't know what year it was, because I don't know the timeline of my mom's life, but when she was younger and starting out, she was only allowed to wear skirts in the office. And because it was like, you're a woman, you should wear suit skirts. Um, but then there's like this era where to become a powerful executive woman, you have to wear a suit, you have to wear pants, and you basically have to act like a man. You have
Yeah.
to pretend like you're on par with men. And when I think about that, I think about the episode of Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt where there's all of these football team owners and all of them are old white men, but there's this one old white woman and she's wearing a suit in the exact same way they are with, and she's talking low and like drinking like bourbon or something and saying ha ha ha, yeah, I hate women, and basically just mimicking everything the guys say. So yeah, it appears in the workplace too.
Isn't isn't that what girl boss means?
Kind of. I mean, there's so many layers to Girl Boss. I have considered I originally wanted to do a Gaslight Gatekeep Girl Boss episode, but I feel like that meme might be past. I'm not sure though. Listeners, if you're listening, just go into the comments of the post on this Instagram and be like, "Hey, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss is still alive, or even
Right.
say it's dead. Save me from that. Let me know. But yes, that is a thing with girl boss, but there's also, again, oh, well, if she's a boss, why do you have to specify that she's a girl? Huh?
Right.
You don't expect a female boss? And that almost, oh, girl boss, it makes a powerful female look cute.
Yeah, exactly.
But why do you think people are so insistent on defining exclusively male and exclusively female spheres?
I absolutely 100% think it has to do with the fear of vulnerability,
Mm.
and specifically the fear that men have about looking feminine, being seen as any sort of feminine, um, or partaking in any activity that is seen as feminine because of vulnerability and toxic masculinity.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing about that is that perfectly segues into my next question, which is that, we talk about these big things, these big ideas with cheerleading and nursing. And there are obviously big topics that are considered more feminine and masculine, but it doesn't, the idea of male flight doesn't just exist on these big levels, it exists in little everyday ways. From me saying, oh yeah, I watch this Barbie movie and it's really good and I think you should like it too. And, we've talked about Barbie movies on the podcast. And obviously, if you don't want to watch a movie you don't want to watch, then you don't have to watch it. But what is that little instinctual brain impulse that makes guys say, no thanks? Oh, I've heard of it. It's girly, therefore it's not for me.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, oh, I don't want to watch. Why would I want to watch that?
Yeah.
Like, if she likes it, I would not want to watch it. You
Yeah.
know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. But even on like a smaller level, even on the level of just thinking, seeing something, and then in the back of your mind, just having it programmed in you that you should stay away from that.
Right.
Like, it's crazy.
And that has to do with how we grew up, like
Mm-hmm.
in this, like in our patriarchal society
Yeah.
where it's prevalent in everything.
Yeah.
It's hard to escape from.
Yeah.
I would dare to say that it's even impossible to escape from.
Mm-hmm. And there's the idea, I read freshman year of college that the idea of homosocial circles are important to development. The idea that as a kid growing up, you have your group, your mainly female group or female identifying group as friends, and then vice versa with guys. And I mean, if you're in preschool, chances are people are still going by the gender expression they were assigned at birth. So that's another part of the homosocial circles. Uh, that makes it less gender diverse at the time. But that's an important part of development. But then at what point is that taken too far? At what point does the need for a homosocial circle become social cues and social conditioning? And at what point does society look at the separate homosocial circles and say, okay, the female circle does this, the male circle does this? And because I think even now, obviously, I have a lot of friends of multiple genders, but I still have unique uh, relationships with women that I don't necessarily have with men.
Yeah.
And so it's part of the homosocial conditioning and homosocial stage in my development.
Well, definitely. Homosocial circle is a thing for sure. Like I did not have I would say that I did not have a friend who would identified as a man until freshman year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
Like, actually, you know? And I feel like I don't particularly know why for my instance, for my example experience. Um, but I think it was just like, especially in middle school, there was an obvious difference in between the girls and the guys.
Mm.
Like maturity level, an interest. And honestly, I would say that my middle school was like all of these like stereotypical things were like heightened for some reason.
Uh-huh.
Um and so I don't think that helped, but I definitely understand what you're saying. Like there is something to be said for the affinity that you have with people who are like who you share an identity with.
So, we are now on to the final segment of this podcast called Convince Chad. Imagine this, Georgia. It's the spring at UW. You are standing on the football field. And for some reason, a lot of guys are there for no reason. They're just chilling. You know, they wanted a place to study and they're like, let's sit on this football field because we can. But funny enough, cheerleading tryouts are happening that day. And, you know, you're there with your clarinet because band. Why are all these people booked on the field at the same time? You know, my rationale doesn't make sense. But just believe it for the sake of this setup. So you go up to these guys and you're like, hey guys, are you here for the cheerleading tryouts? Is that why you're on the field? And this guy in the group, he's obviously the wannabe alpha. His name is Chad. He comes up to you and he goes, what? No? Cheerleading? That's for girls only. What do I have to do with cheerleading? Now, it is your time to convince Chad to embrace his destiny, to realize that cheerleading is not just for girls. And where you have been told it is for girls, that's kind of made up. Go ahead.
Chad, I just want you to know that you could be a real leader among your friends, among your frat, if you are the first guy to really venture out and try cheerleading. Do you just want to be another sheep and follow along that cheerleading's only for girls? Would an alpha really do that? The answer is no. Chad, you should try out for the cheer team. You should lead the way for men in cheer at UW. Because that makes an alpha an alpha.
Very inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I would like to interject to all the listeners. I do not believe in, you know, there being such thing as alpha males and beta males, but, you know.
Obviously not.
I use it as a joke. I use it to suggest that Chad is one who does believe in alpha males.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Georgia, it was so much fun having you on the podcast.
I had such a great time. I loved how we bounced around so many topics, got in deep about a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
But this has been a wonderful discussion, Sarah Glass. Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And to all the listeners out there, keep it groovy, keep it classy. See you next time.